The brochure landed in my lap just as the organ began the second hymn. She leaned in, her perfume too sweet for the moment, and whispered, "Leave now." My wife's casket hadn't even been lowered. If you've ever been treated like a burden, this story is for you. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 72 years old from Savannah, Georgia. I used to walk my wife through Forsyth Park every morning, rain or shine. It was raining that day. Not a dramatic downpour, just a steady southern drizzle that made the grass slick and the folding chairs sink slightly into the earth. They'd placed a white tent over the seating area, as if thin canvas could protect grief from seeping in. The sky was a heavy gray, the kind that presses down on your chest. I remember the way the floral arrangements bled with moisture, petals wilting faster than they should, their colors muted under the storm's breath. People murmured softly behind me. A hymn hung in the damp air, but beneath it I could hear the small sounds of life, the wet sniffle of an old friend, the muffled cough of a restless child, the slow shuffle of umbrellas brushing against each other. Every sound felt too loud, as if grief had sharpened my senses and stripped away all filters. My wife's coffin lay just a few feet away, mahogany polished to a dark gleam, brass handles glinting beneath the low light. A single white rose, the one I'd chosen that morning, trembling as I laid it down, rested like a vow across its surface. That rose was all I had left to give her. I sat in the front row, beside me my son, Marcus, stiff in his dark suit. Next to him, his wife, Vanessa. And that's when it happened. No hesitation, no shame. She reached into her handbag with a casual grace that didn't match the setting, the kind of elegance only money seems to teach. Slowly, deliberately, she drew out a glossy trifold brochure. It slipped from her fingers and landed on my lap with the weight of a verdict. I looked down. The bold letters caught my eye first. Meadow Pines Assisted Living. For 10 long seconds, I just stared. The hymn went on. The pastor's voice droned faintly above us. My eyes blurred, but not from the rain. Finally, I lifted my gaze. Vanessa didn't look at me. She adjusted her sunglasses, though there was no sun, and leaned in close enough for me to smell that syrupy perfume. Her voice cut through the hymn, quiet but cold. "You shouldn't be here anymore. After this, we'll drive you to Meadow Pines. They've got your room ready." My throat closed. My chest burned. I couldn't speak. My hands trembled, not from age, but from fury, from disbelief, from the rawness of grief colliding with cruelty. I rose slowly. My knees cracked with the effort, bones protesting as if they knew I shouldn't have to do this now. The pastor stopped mid-sentence, startled. Dozens of heads turned. Vanessa's lips curled into a faint smile, the kind of smile people wear when they think they've won. Marcus didn't move, didn't look at me, not once. I turned and walked. I walked out of my wife's funeral, alone, rain soaking through my jacket, sliding down my collar, plastering my thinning hair to my forehead. I had no umbrella, no car waiting, just the sound of my shoes thudding against wet grass and the hollow echo of my heart splitting open like porcelain dropped on tile. The cemetery gates seemed farther than they were. Every step dragged, as though the ground itself wanted to hold me back. Maybe it wasn't the distance that made it feel so far. Maybe it was what I was leaving behind. The life, the love, the one steady thing that had made sense. We had been married 44 years. We'd raised a son together. We'd weathered the long nights of sickness and the bright mornings of recovery. After my back surgery, we'd even moved in with Marcus and Vanessa. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, until the cancer came and took her from me. And now, it seemed, they were coming for me, too. I stopped before I reached the sidewalk. My shoes were soaked through, my jacket clinging heavy. I turned back. Under the white tent, mourners bowed their heads, pretending not to notice the old man dismissed like an unwanted servant. The casket still sat unopened beneath the veil of rain, my rose wilting by the second. My wife had once told me, "Grief makes some people kind, and some people cruel. I had wanted to believe Vanessa was overwhelmed, maybe even misguided. But in that moment, standing drenched, gripping a nursing home brochure at my wife's funeral, I saw her clearly, cold, calculated, ready to erase me. Later that evening, I sat at a bus stop on Drayton Street, watching the rain streak down glass panes. My trousers clung to my legs, and my shoes squelched when I shifted my feet. No one offered me a ride, not Marcus, not any family member, not even an old neighbor who had known me since my son was a boy. When the cab finally came, I handed over what little cash I had and asked to be taken back to their house. Not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. Not yet. The locks hadn't been changed, but the silence inside spoke volumes. No dinner simmered on the stove. No photograph of my wife smiled from the mantel. Even her favorite blanket, the one she kept folded on the couch, ready for cool evenings, was gone. Vanessa appeared from the hallway, clipboard in hand. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood. She looked at me as if I were a delivery to be processed. "We already packed a bag for you," she said. "It's in the trunk." My voice barely rose above a whisper. "Did you even cry today?" She didn't answer. Marcus stepped out a few moments later. His eyes were rimmed red. Guilt, maybe, or just convenience. He muttered, almost rehearsed, "It's what Mom would have wanted." I didn't reply, because in a way they were right. It was time I left, but not the way they expected. Not quietly, not erased, and certainly not without a plan, because my wife hadn't raised a fool, and she hadn't left me defenseless. She had left me a key, not one that fit in a door, but one that unlocked truths. And soon Vanessa would learn what I already knew. Some locks only stay shut until you remember who you really are. It didn't start at the funeral. That was just the public execution. The erosion began months earlier, quietly, one tiny indignity at a time. When Helen first got sick, we didn't have a plan. Not really. Our house, the one we'd filled with 40 years of pictures, laughter, and fights that always ended with her making tea, had become impossible. Too many stairs that turned into mountains. Too many rooms that echoed with the weight of memories. Too much space for two bodies that were breaking down. Marcus told us moving in with them would be temporary. Said it was family helping family. "We'll make it work, Dad," he promised, gripping my shoulder. "You need rest. Mom needs care. We've got you." Vanessa smiled then, smiled wide enough to show every tooth. She kissed Helen's cheek and called her Mom. She even hugged me, whispering, "You're safe with us." It's an honor. For a few weeks she lived up to those words. She brewed tea for both of us. She fluffed pillows. She asked about my old workshop stories. But then the oxygen tank came. That sound. The hiss and click, like a metronome marking out her decline. It filled every corner of the house. And with it, things shifted. Subtly at first. Vanessa stopped making 2 cups of tea. One mug sat steaming for her alone while Helen looked at me with tired eyes. I started boiling water myself. The thermostat, once warm enough to ease Helen's aching joints, dropped by a few degrees every night. Vanessa said it saved money, but I saw Helen shiver beneath 3 blankets. They were small things, easy to overlook. Until one afternoon I walked into the kitchen and caught her pressed against the counter, phone to her ear, whispering words that split me open. "They're not dying fast enough." "I'm losing my mind." I froze mid-step. For a second I thought maybe I misheard. I told myself I had. Because the alternative, that she wanted my wife gone sooner, was too cruel to carry. I didn't confront her. Cowardice dressed up as grace. I swallowed it and told myself grief made people say wild things. Then came the appointments. At first I went to every chemo session. I carried the blanket she loved. I read aloud her favorite poems while the IV dripped its poison meant to save her. I counted her breaths when she slept in the hard recliner chair, until Vanessa insisted otherwise. "You need rest, Jerry," she said, touching my arm like she cared. You've gone gray. You'll collapse, and then what good will you be? Let me take her. She said it sweet, but it was the beginning of my exile, wrapped in false concern. Soon she was the one talking to the doctors, scribbling notes, filling pill boxes. She started reviewing the bills before I even saw them. She decided, then told me later what Helen needed. I asked once if Helen agreed. Vanessa's lips curved, but her eyes didn't move. She nods when I explain. You don't need to worry so much, but Helen's nods. They were weak, vague, a woman too tired to argue. One afternoon, I came back earlier than expected with her prescriptions. The house was quiet, except for a low murmur from Marcus's office. The door wasn't shut all the way. I stopped, leaned, and saw Vanessa on a Zoom call. A man in a crisp suit appeared on the screen, his voice steady, businesslike. Once you have power of attorney, we can expedite the property transfer. My chest locked. Vanessa's eyes flicked up too late. She snapped the laptop closed like slamming a coffin. That was just refinancing talk, she said quickly. But it was a lie. We had nothing left to refinance. We'd sold our home the year before. We lived in their house now. And that lie, sloppy, careless, confirmed what I feared. Still, I said nothing. Because what could I say? I was a guest in my son's house, watching his wife play chess with my life while I held no pieces. Then one night, Helen called me to her bedside. Her voice was a paper-thin whisper. Jerry. I rushed to her, kneeling beside the bed. Her hand shook as she pressed something into my palm, a folded scrap of paper. I opened it under the dim lamp. 4 lines written in her handwriting, jagged from weakness. Jerry, don't let them put you away. Find the envelope. Use it if they hurt you. I looked at her, panic clawing at me. What envelope? Her lips moved, but the sound was gone. A rattling breath, then silence. Her eyes drifted closed. She never woke again. Vanessa told everyone it was peaceful, smiled while she said it. In her sleep. Like a blessing. But I knew better. Helen hadn't been afraid of death. She'd been afraid of what came after. For me. The envelope. I didn't find it until a week later, tucked behind a cross-stitch frame Helen had kept for years in her nightstand drawer. Inside was a thick packet. A trust document. Not a will. A trust. 2 signatures stared back at me. Helen's, and one belonging to a woman named Margot Lansing, attorney at law. Clipped to the front was another note in Helen's hand. If Vanessa tries to exile you, activate clause 6.5. Margot will know what to do. Love, H clause 6.5. The words burned into me. I wasn't a lawyer, just a retired shop teacher who paid bills on time and trusted people who didn't deserve it, but I knew a warning when I saw one. That night, restless, I checked the household mail tray Vanessa always sorted before I touched it. Beneath a stack of junk and a fake Comcast flyer, I found an envelope with my name, still sealed. Inside, a bill from Meadow Pines Assisted Living. The date hit me like a punch. 2 weeks before the funeral. The invoice read, Room reserved, initial deposit received. Arrival date, June 15th. My wife died on June 12th. The funeral was June 14th. They had planned to ship me off before her body was even lowered. I didn't sleep that night, not from grief, but from fury. The kind of fury that doesn't roar but freezes, sharp and absolute. The next morning I rose before dawn. I shaved, put on my best shirt, polished my shoes until the leather caught light. For the first time in over a year, I wanted to look like a man again. Not a burden, not a relic, a man. And I walked 6 blocks through the heavy Savannah air to the courthouse records department. I asked if a lawyer named Margot Lansing still practiced. The clerk nodded. 2 floors up, I climbed. My legs shook, but my resolve did not. The receptionist at her office opened her mouth to ask if I had an appointment. Whatever she saw in my face, sweat, grief, rage pressed tight into skin, made her stop mid-sentence. Then Margot appeared, A woman in her 60s, sharp eyes behind thin frames. She looked at me once, then said, "Helen told me you'd come." My throat nearly broke. I handed her the trust copy and Helen's note. My hands trembled as she scanned. Her gaze lifted, steady. "Gerald," she said gently, "they think you're helpless." But this document says otherwise. I leaned forward, whispering like I was afraid the walls could hear. "What's clause 6.5? Her mouth curved, not kindly, but with precision. "It's the abuse trigger clause," she said. "If a surviving spouse is threatened, humiliated, or coerced after their partner's death, and that action is documented, the heirs lose all inheritance rights." Immediately the words sank in. What kind of documentation? She tapped the trust with one red fingernail. Any audio, a transcript, even a credible witness statement. Helen made sure. She knew what Vanessa might try. My hands shook harder, but this time not from weakness, from something rising again inside me, something I hadn't felt since the day before my wife took her last breath. Control. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about grief. It was about the insult to my wife's memory, to the decades we spent building something steady, honest, loving. Vanessa wanted to erase me like a footnote, like a receipt she couldn't even remember paying. But Helen had known. She knew exactly what storm was waiting for me after she left, and she had scattered breadcrumbs with names, numbers, instructions, tiny lanterns on the dark road ahead. Margot slid a fresh copy of the trust across her desk. Yellow highlights glared back at me. Clause 6.5, circled twice. She tapped her pen against it, her voice steady but pointed. "Something irrefutable," she said. "Something they can't walk back." Can't explain away. I sat there, staring at the page, and my mind drifted back to that rainy morning under the funeral tent. The sound of the brochure hitting my lap, sharp, obscene against the hush of hymnals. The faint crinkle of high-gloss paper as the organ played "Abide with Me." Vanessa leaning closer, her perfume thick enough to choke me, whispering, "Leave now." And then, the faintest sound behind me. A soft click, the unmistakable rhythm of someone filming with a phone. Margot leaned back, folding her hands. "Bring me that footage, Gerald. Bring me the moment she thought you were finished. That's your weapon." I nodded, though my throat was tight. I left her office, but I didn't go straight home. Instead, my feet carried me to St. Mary's, the church where I had said goodbye, the church where I had walked out under rain and humiliation. The building smelled of old wood and candle wax, familiar and heavy. Pastor Clifton met me in the hallway. His face softened when he saw me. "Gerald," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry about Helen." She was light in a dim room. I swallowed hard. My voice cracked. Did you live stream the service?" He nodded. "For the shut-ins. We've been doing it since COVID. It's archived. Why?" I didn't answer. My silence was enough. He led me into his office. The room hummed faintly with the old desktop computer. He typed, scrolled, clicked. Then the video appeared on the screen. I sat there, every muscle stiff, as the day replayed in grainy pixels. The drizzle, the bowed shoulders, the weight in my chest. And then, there she was, Vanessa, clear as daylight, the brochure falling, my lap stiffening, her sunglasses hiding nothing. And then the whisper. The church microphone, tinny but merciless, caught her words. "Leave now." "They've got your room ready." Pastor Clifton shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He glanced at me, then at the screen, then back. I leaned forward. "Email it to Margot," I said. My voice was low, sharp. He didn't speak, just clicked send. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, I realized something had changed. I wasn't hunched. My shoulders weren't curled in apology. I walked straighter. For the first time in weeks, I looked like the man Helen had married, not the man her daughter-in-law wanted buried alive. When I opened the door to the house, Vanessa was in the kitchen. She stood at the counter, sipping something green from a blender cup, her phone in the other hand. Marcus wasn't there. She glanced up. Her eyes flicked over me. "You've been out?" I nodded. "Had to clear my head." She tilted her head, one perfect brow arched. "You should pack tonight. Meadow Pines has better food than we do. You'll like it." I let the words hang. Then I asked, steady, "Do they take people with power of attorney over someone else's money?" Her hand froze on the blender cup. A beat, then a laugh. Brittle, rehearsed. "Why would you ask that?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, when the house finally settled into silence, I slipped into the garage. Helen's boxes were still stacked in the back. Vanessa had refused to unpack them, said they smelled like mothballs. I knelt, pried one open, and there it was, Helen's old address book. I flipped through pages filled with fading names, phone numbers scrawled in blue ink. Then one caught my eye. A line in Helen's careful hand. J. Kimball, accounting. Ask if things vanish. The next morning, I dialed. The voice that answered was quiet, efficient. "Kimball," I explained, stumbling at first, then steady. "I want to know if someone's been using Helen's accounts." Without her signature, he didn't waste time. Asked me to fax over statements, cards, anything with numbers. I sent what I had. By evening, my phone rang. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "your wife's account was accessed 17 times in the last 2 months. Transfers, balance shifts, most of it funneled into a secondary account tied to an LLC." My chest tightened. "Name?" A pause. Then, "Vanessa Whitmore." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles burned. "Total?" He hesitated. 78,000. Give or take. That night, Marcus knocked softly on my door. Came in, closed it behind him. His face looked tired, worn. "Dad," he began. I waited. "Vanessa says you're being difficult. That you're making this harder than it needs to be. I know this is a lot, but you need to trust her." I looked at him. "My only son." "Do you?" I asked. He blinked. "She's my wife." "Helen was mine," I said softly. He flinched. Didn't answer. Before he left, I asked one more question. "Did you sign anything for her?" "Recently." His brows knit. "What do you mean?" "Anything with your mother's name, after she passed." He frowned. "Just insurance stuff. Vanessa handled it. I signed where she told me." I nodded. "Then you might want to talk to a lawyer." He didn't reply, just left, closing the door with more force than necessary. The next day, Margot called. Her voice carried a calm edge. "I have everything I need." I met her at her office, papers spread before us like weapons on a battlefield. She explained step by step. The trust clause 6.5 would trigger once an abuse report was filed. Verbal, emotional, financial. The funeral footage covered verbal. The account transfers covered financial. And once triggered, the estate froze. Every cent. Every asset. Not just Vanessa's share. Marcus's too. Collateral damage. I must have looked torn because Margot's eyes softened, but her voice stayed hard. Sometimes, justice requires a clean break. Even from those who didn't know they were holding the knife I signed where she pointed. My hand didn't tremble this time. By Friday, the documents were filed under seal. Quiet. Absolute. Vanessa didn't know yet. Marcus didn't either. But the fuse was lit. And beneath the surface of their comfortable life, it burned. The first crack appeared on a Monday. I was in the kitchen sipping bitter instant coffee because Vanessa had accidentally thrown out the good beans. The morning light leaked through the blinds in pale stripes. The house felt colder than usual, as if it had been emptied of warmth overnight. Marcus came down the stairs in his usual rush, tie hanging loose around his neck, briefcase clutched under one arm. But this time his face was pale, tight. His eyes avoided mine for a beat too long. He glanced at me, then at Vanessa, who leaned against the sink, scrolling through her phone like a queen in her marble court, unbothered and unquestioned. "Vanessa?" Marcus said. His voice was taut, The kind of voice that held more than words. Why is the estate account frozen? Her thumb stopped mid-scroll. What? She asked flatly. He repeated himself louder. The lawyer called me this morning. Mom's account is locked. They said there's an inquiry into fund misuse. They said a trust clause was triggered. For the first time, a shadow crossed her face. It was there for half a second. Then she barked a laugh. Too sharp. Too loud. That's ridiculous. Your father's just confused. He's grieving. You can't listen to him. But Marcus wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me. Really looking. Not through me, not around me, but into me. And I met his gaze. Steady. Silent. Then I slid an envelope across the table. The one Margot had pressed into my hands that morning. Inside was a printed transcript of the funeral recording. Words highlighted in yellow. Words Vanessa could never erase. Leave now. They've got your room ready. Temporary stay. He's not her problem anymore. The last line wasn't from the funeral at all. It was from a voicemail, a message she had left on Margot's office phone, not realizing Helen had already filed the trust that would outlive her schemes. Marcus unfolded the paper, read slowly, his mouth opened then closed again. Finally, he lifted his eyes to his wife. Did you say this? Vanessa didn't flinch, didn't blink. You're seriously taking his side? She snapped. She snatched the transcript from his hand, crumpled it, and threw it toward the trash can. Then she stormed upstairs. Her heels struck the steps like hammer blows. 3 minutes later, the front door slammed. The house shook with silence. Marcus stayed where he was, standing for a long moment, then lowering himself into a chair, his hands pressed against his face. He stayed like that, breathing heavy, his shoulders sagging. I didn't say a word. Sometimes silence weighs more than judgment. That afternoon, Margot filed the final affidavit. Clause 6.5 wasn't just a threat anymore. It was officially enacted, and everything changed. The estate lawyer himself called me that evening. His voice carried the gravity of finality. Mr. Whitmore, he said, per the conditions of the trust and upon confirmation of the abuse clause, your daughter-in-law is disqualified from receiving any distribution. Your son's portion is under review. Pending his cooperation, I gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean? If he signs a statement acknowledging coercion and waiving claim to any contested assets, his share may be restored. Otherwise, the disqualification extends to him as well. I closed my eyes. Nodded, though he couldn't see me. Thank you. The next day, I walked into Meadow Pines, not as a broken man being left behind, as an observer, as someone who now held the paper that proved he wasn't disposable. The receptionist looked up brightly. Mr. Whitmore. We were expecting you last month. I smiled, thin and sharp. Change of plans. I asked to see the director. Mr. Callahan greeted me in a polished office that smelled faintly of disinfectant and fresh flowers. He was polite, professional. His voice softened when he heard my story. We were just following the intake documents submitted by Mrs. Whitmore, he said carefully. Everything looked in order at the time. I slid a copy of the trust order across his desk. He read it. His eyebrows shot upward. You were the surviving spouse. I nodded. And the one they tried to send here. He set the paper down. His face tightened. I'm sorry. This happens more often than you'd think. Adult children, spouses. They confuse age with weakness. They think aging means disposable. His words struck deep, but for the first time I didn't feel hollow. I felt seen. I left his office with his card in my pocket and a strange sense of peace in my chest. Not triumph, something cleaner, like dignity being handed back after someone tried to strip it away. When I returned to the house, Vanessa's things were gone. Closets emptied, perfume bottles vanished from the bathroom counter. A silence that used to belong to her clung to the walls. Marcus avoided me for days. His steps were heavy, his words few. Then one night, he knocked on my door. Dad, he said, standing in the doorway, eyes rimmed with guilt. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was doing all that. I studied his face. My boy, my only child. I believe you, I said quietly. He swallowed. Can I make it right? I looked at him for a long moment. You can start by telling the truth in court. And he did. He signed every paper Margot placed in front of him. His hand shook, but he signed. Vanessa fought. Of course she did. She hired a lawyer, dressed herself in self-pity, claimed coercion, claimed emotional manipulation. She said the audio was taken out of context. But Margot was relentless, meticulous. She laid down every piece of evidence like a hammer striking nails. The funeral recording, the bank transfers, the voicemail, and most damning of all, the meadow. Pine's invoice dated before Helen was even in the ground. The judge's words rang through the courtroom. This is not miscommunication. This is targeted financial and emotional abuse Vanessa lost. Everything. She packed her bags and moved in with her sister in Charleston. Marcus moved out of the house too. Said it held too many ghosts, too many echoes of voices that no longer belonged. He offered me the house, offered to let me stay, but I declined. The last move I'd make wouldn't be into another man's shadow. I found a small rental cottage near the marsh, just 2 miles from where Helen and I used to walk. The porch faced the water. The air smelled of salt and pine. It wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. The name on the lease was mine. The key in my pocket opened a door no one else controlled. One morning a package arrived. No return address. Inside was the wedding photo Helen always kept by her bedside, the one that had gone missing after she passed. On the back, taped with a yellow post-it, was a note written in sharp, neat handwriting. You remembered who you were, so I came home too. There's a silence that follows justice, not the hollow kind, not the silence that gnaws at your ribs and leaves you staring into shadows. No. This silence feels wide, spacious, like someone finally opened a window in a room that had been locked for too long. My mornings begin with the water, always the water. The marsh outside my cottage hums with its own rhythm. Reeds bow gently in the tide. The current whispers against the banks, and the birds, Helen's beloved chorus section of the sky, make their entrance. I used to ignore them. Too busy with work, too tangled in chores, too tired, but Helen always saw them. She'd pull the car to the side of the road just to point out a streak of red against the branches. She kept a tattered bird guidebook in the glove box. Said you couldn't call yourself fully awake until you named at least one bird by song. Now I listen. I keep a notebook by the window. Scribble down names. Chickadee. Wren. Red-shouldered hawk. I even hung a feeder from the porch, and every time a cardinal lands, I whisper to myself, Helen was right again. Old dogs learn, especially when the lesson is survival. After the court finalized the trust lockout, Margot called me one last time. Her voice carried that clipped efficiency lawyers use when everything is finally complete. You're officially the sole beneficiary, Gerald. Vanessa's rights are revoked permanently. Marcus's share has been moved into a separate clause. You control access. Now I stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the marsh, and let the words settle. I didn't feel elated, didn't feel rich. I felt restored, like a name carved into stone that someone had tried to sand away, only to see the letters hold firm. I asked her if Helen had planned it all from the start, if my wife had sat with her, imagining every betrayal before it happened. Margot chuckled softly. She didn't plan the betrayal. But she prepared for the possibility. That's the difference. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Helen hadn't lived with suspicion. She'd lived with foresight. She knew people sometimes reveal their truest selves when the world thinks you're weak. Marcus still calls. Twice a week, sometimes more. He visits twice a month, always without Vanessa. Our conversations no longer wobble on guilt. They're quieter now, honest. Sometimes he brings coffee, the good beans Vanessa once accidentally threw away. He doesn't rush off anymore. One afternoon, he stayed long enough to help me replace the porch light. After we finished, he sat on the steps, staring at the marsh. I was blind, he said quietly. I wanted things to be simple, easy, but Mom knew it wouldn't be. I studied his face, the lines deepening near his eyes, his hands resting on his knees. You have her hands, I said. He turned his face away, and in that silence, I knew the words had reached him deeper than he wanted to admit. Vanessa didn't fare as well. 4 months after the verdict, she filed for bankruptcy. The money she siphoned was gone. Her new lawyer dropped her case halfway through her appeal. She moved in with her sister in Charleston. No one cried for her, not Marcus, not her sister, certainly not me. Justice, when it works, isn't loud. It doesn't roar in triumph or sing in parades. It's quieter, precise, surgical. It doesn't claw at the past. It protects the future. I've set mine. I don't sit in the church pew anymore, not out of anger, but because the wood still smells of wet roses and shame. That scent belongs to another life, another man. Instead, I walk. Each morning I take the trail that winds along the marsh. The air is heavy with salt, but it clears the lungs. At the far end, there's a bench overlooking the water. That's where I go. I carry Helen's scarf with me, the one she wore on windy days, pale blue fraying at the ends. Sometimes I tie it to the bench rail, let the wind carry it like a flag. Other times I keep it balled in my fist, pressed against my chest. One afternoon I found something waiting for me on that bench. A folded sheet of paper, no name, no envelope, just one line written in clean, deliberate script. They thought your silence meant surrender. It never did. I keep that note tucked in my bird guide now, right between the pages for herons and sparrows. Some stories end with shouting. Mine didn't. Mine ended with courtrooms, trust documents, silent departures, and one perfectly timed recording that turned betrayal into proof. And peace. If you've listened this far, maybe you know silence too. Maybe someone tried to make you small, but maybe, like Helen, you left yourself a key. And all you need now is the courage to use it. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments